Welcome back to Taiwan this week, and it was a rather busy week here in Taiwan in regards to January's elections, and it began on Monday with Han Kuo-yu announcing that former Premier Simon Chang will be his running mate. Han told reporters that Chang was his top choice for the KMT's vice presidential candidate, as he has close ties with grassroots communities, while Chang said that he expects the ticket to help Taiwan return to a better political environment, and as an independent, he has no sense of political colour and only sees right and wrong. Now, on Tuesday, former Legislative Speaker Wang Jingping announced that he's no longer planning to run in January's election. Speaking at an impromptu press conference, Wang apologised too and expressed his thanks to his supporters who had been anticipating his participation in the election since he first announced plans to run in March. And Wang said although his withdrawal from the race is a regret, the decision does not mean an end to his political career, and he will use his many years of experience to serve society. Now, on Wednesday, People First Party Chairman James Soong announced his candidacy in January's presidential election, saying he believes it's time for Taiwan to move away from pan-blue and pan-green politics and find a middle road. Soong said that he's not entering the election for fame or self-benefit, but to fight for a win for Taiwan and a victory for the Republic of China. Soong has announced that Sandra Yu, the former chairwoman of the United Communications Group, will be his running mate, and there's also some talk that Hon Hai founder Terry Guo could be a PFP lawmaker at large. And it will be the fourth time that Soong will have sought the presidency, and as he ran as an independent candidate in 2000 and his capacity as PFP chairman in 2012 and again in 2016. And of course he also ran for the vice presidency on a ticket with the KMT's Lien Jan in the 2004 election. So Ross, there we go. The leaders of the parties that are running as presidents all made an announcement this week. There we go. So start with Han Kuo-yu and Simon Chang as his running mate.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Gavin, when you said all made, or you could have just added the word all finally made. It's amazing how these decisions get delayed until such a short number of days before the election. Han Kuo-yu has been the nominee of the Kuomintang since he won the party primary in June, and then it was confirmed at the party congress or July. So he's had months to make this decision. Soong Chu-yu, James Soong, he knew that this election was coming for 4 years after he ran the last time, so he could have made this decision a lot earlier. Wang Jingping, the former legislative Yuan speaker, he kind of was in the Kuomintang primary, then he was out of it, and he kept saying, I'm going to run until the end. But he really had no legal basis to be a candidate anymore when he didn't join as an independent candidate seeking to get on the ballot by signatures on petitions the way Annette Lu, former vice president, tried to do. So his announcement now is a bit silly. I mean, if he was serious about being a candidate, he would have, again, filed to run via the independent route. So it's nice to see that there's finally progress. One wonders why all of these candidates wait until so late. It just shows how disorganized some of their campaigns are. And it's not necessarily the fault of the individual. We know that they're dealing with internal constituencies, especially at the Kuomintang, and there are other potential selections to be the vice president. James Soong, maybe not dealing with internal constituencies because he dominates the People First Party, but obviously he was dealing with the options or the potential for cooperation with Ko-wen and Terry Go Taiming. So he had competing or other considerations as well. So one could conclude by saying if this is the way that these candidates operate their attempts to be president, it's no surprise that Tsai Ing-wen, as the incumbent, has a large poll lead at this point.
So, Jieting, two running mates and two presidential candidates. But we're still waiting, of course, for Tsai Ing-wen to announce whether or not William Lai will be her running mate.
Yeah, I think the problem on the blue camp, has basically been at the beginning of this election season, things were looking up for them, right? So coming off of the November local elections, people on the blue camp and the KMT basically thought, the wind is behind them. They have the upper hand. So, all the people with presidential ambitions, all the sort of people that we've been watching for the last decade or two, is coming out and trying to get a seat at the table. And then throughout basically much of 2019, we see basically the KMT, one having their own sort of identity crisis as to, how, just exactly where they stand between Taiwan and China. And then you have sort of the more external kind of global factors of the PRC becoming the People's Republic of China, Beijing becoming much more just bare bones, aggressive, much more. There's so much more negative press coming out, with regards to China, and then obviously what's going on with Hong Kong as well. So I think it's sort of this process of, in the beginning, everybody coming out thinking that, if they get to represent the KMT, there's a really good chance of winning, to basically now that, all the people who kind of said they wanted to be president is having a little bit of a hard time coming out and saying, well, I don't, I lost the primary, I don't want to do it anymore. They have to answer to their donors, their constituents, their, people, their supporters. And so I think it's just this very messy and honestly, very just rather annoying to watch kind of soap opera that we've been witnessing for the last year, basically.
Right, of course, Ross, the soap opera, Simon Chang as a new member of the soap opera.
To be fair to Kuo-yu and to Simon Chang, he has the qualifications to be a very capable vice president. He did serve as Minister of Science and Technology, served briefly as premier during a very frankly difficult period, because it was the period between when Ma Ying-jeou's or President Tsai was elected and Ma Ying-jeou was stepping down, and unfortunately the way the laws and the Constitution are written, it's a very long transition period. But the Legislative Yuan had already taken its seats with a DPP majority, so his power was very limited during those 4 months, and of course popular opinion was largely against the outgoing government at that point. But he still had fairly high poll ratings, and he had a long career in the technology industry. So again, from a competency perspective, this guy could be a minister or vice president or a premier under any political party, and one has to say, well, yeah, he's got excellent qualifications as an administrator, and actually as far as one of the key industries for Taiwan, the technology industry, one would have to say, great, the government needs more people with actual industry experience, because we know that both the Kuomintang and the Minjindang DPP governments have been staffed up by way too many lawyers, and I could say that because I'm a lawyer, Gavin, and too many professors. And I could say that because I do some teaching as well, Gavin. So there's too many lawyers and professors and not a lot of people with real-world industry experience. So to have someone like him on board in a governing team, again, you can't really criticize it. But, of course, the DPP is going to find ways to criticize him as well because, well, he's running with the Kuomintang, so they're going to make him out to be a very partisan person. They'll find things that he did as Minister of Science and Technology or as Premier to say that he didn't fulfill his promises or some program didn't work out. But that's just expected partisan arguments during the heat of an election campaign.
And, of course, James Soong also took someone from the business sector, that being Sandra Yu, the former chairwoman of the United Communications Group.
Well, somebody with advertising industry, public relations kind of experience. It might help James Soong as far as improving his image a bit, but obviously he's not going to win the election. This is more about helping the PFP get seats in the legislative yuan. And to be fair to James Soong and the PFP, last time he did get almost 13% of the presidential election vote, and the PFP won enough votes to get non-constituency seats and to form a party caucus in the legislative yuan. So for a small party, they didn't do as well as the New Power Party, but they stuck around through now several election cycles. So anything she could do, not so much with the goal of helping the party win the presidency, because they won't, but anything she could do to help the PFP maintain a few seats in the legislative yuan, that's great for the PFP.
Right, and Jieting, of course, there's been much talk here about James Soong's running. Could stymie Han Kuo-yu's chances of victory?
Yeah, I think it's, without looking closer at the polls, I think it's a little, I think it kind of cuts two different ways, right? Because as we've seen with Han Kuo-yu and also more recently with the KMT at large party list, there is sort of this divide within the blue camp right now, right? So there's sort of the more intellectual, the more elite, the more business side of the blue supporters who are rather unhappy with the choice of Han Kuo-yu and with sort of where the party is going. And then you have Han Kuo-yu's supporters and his fans saying, well, this is the true KMT. This is what KMT should always have been about. And so, is there? There were, I think, people within the KMT elite who were leaning on figures like Terry Guo, who, they kind of saw as the more, presentable or the more elitist kind of face of the KMT. Are these votes going to go over to James Soong? That's one possibility. There's, people who are, I'm sure there are people who say, well, I will not vote for Tsai Ing-wen no matter what because I'm a diehard KMT fan, but I don't like Han Kuo-yu either. James Soong might be a acceptable alternative. But then again, James Soong is such a familiar face, right? And, I think people he's been in the presidential contention for, however many cycles that you mentioned, right? So I think people have, it's very hard to have an open mind about him at this point. I would say kind of, that's sort of my guess. So I think it's a little hard to say right now what James Soong's variable is going to be in this particular presidential election cycle.
Right, and if all that wasn't enough, the DPP and the KMT also released their lists for at-large legislative seats this week, and both selections proved somewhat controversial. Now, the DPP's Central Executive Committee announced an initial list of 15 legislature at-large nominees late Thursday evening. After 5 hours of negotiations, however, the 5 hours of negotiations apparently wasn't enough, as they came out shortly thereafter and included a total of 34 names as possible candidates. Now, the DPP's top at-large legislature nominees on the revised list are lawmaker who works for the DPP, Kuo-yu Chin, now Green Citizens Action Alliance Deputy Secretary-General Hong Shen-han, and Social Democratic Party Governor also make up the top three. That's Fan Yun from the Social Democratic Party. Now, the KMT released its candidates for the legislature at large seats the day before, and all that turned into a rather big mess, with basically the KMT's vice presidential candidate Simon Chang coming out and voicing his concern about the list, describing it as disappointing. Now, there was some kind of controversy over the list, as party chairman Wu Deni put his name on it, as did, Mr. Cho Yi, who's a rather controversial figure, and the former presidential office spokesman Charles Chen was also included in the KMT's lawmaker at large list. So, Ross, the lawmaker at large list causing a bit of controversy there, just because who was on them and who wasn't on them. Yeah,
well, who or Wu, we're on and off, I suppose one could say, given the surprise that Wu Deni was on the list. I actually... putting aside what number on the list, because remember, Gavin, very important concept here is the safe list, or as they call it in Mandarin, the Anquan Mingdan, because this is the party list, and they get in based on the number of at-large votes that when people are going to vote for their constituency, and they vote for the political party at large. So we don't know for sure, and it's really hard to poll this, how many seats the Kuomintang or the DPP or the smaller parties will get off of the party list. But there's a safe number, right? If you're on the top 12 for the Kuomintang.
14. The candidate said 14.
Well, that's their estimate. They're being optimistic. We don't know for sure. But okay, maybe 14. So anyone 1 to 14 is going to get a seat. So whether it's you're 1 or 7 or 14, a lot of that's just kind of optics. So Wu is on the safe list, apparently, and people were surprised. But I actually think for healthy political development, it's not bad for the party chairman to actually be in the legislative yuan day to day. I've said for years, like, James Soong should have run for the legislative yuan previously instead of just enjoying being a party chairman and criticizing politics and policymaking from the sidelines. So assuming Wu Deni is still the party chairman, which is not a guarantee. If they lose the presidency, he might get forced out as chairman. So maybe he's trying to get a legislative seat, so he still has a paying job. But if he is still party chairman and he's also in the legislature, That's actually not a bad thing. The criticism, which is a very valid criticism, is a lot of the people on the list have not necessarily been involved in day-to-day politics for the party. And a lot of people who are currently at-large legislators, and actually some of them, one might say, have done a pretty good job, are not on the list. And this has disappointed a lot of people. Some of them are younger. The one name that's gotten a lot of media attention is Jason Ing-Wen. Was very high profile on marriage equality, very high profile on technology industry, generally a well-liked guy, unless you're a DPP supporter. You don't like anyone from the Kuomintang. But he wasn't on the list. So some of this might change up until the filing deadline for both parties, whether Kuomintang, because there's a lot of controversy with the DPP's proposed list as well. So there'll probably be a lot of back and forth right up until the actual filing deadline. And again, one wonders, why did both parties wait so long to come up with these lists? And then for the DPP, the controversy is bringing in some outsiders. And clearly this is all about not splitting the non-KMT vote. So whether it's someone who's driven by social policy issue, low-cost housing or healthcare, or identity issues. And we see that there's been some fracturing because some people think, well, the DPP hasn't been aggressive enough on Taiwan identity, hasn't been aggressive enough on giving everyone a free house. So you have a fracture, or environmental protection, or whatever your issue is. Obviously, the DPP doesn't want this to fracture, because if it fractures, then it would only help the Kuomintang be potentially the party with the largest number of seats, but not necessarily a majority. So the DPP is trying to co-opt all these non-DPP politicians to run on the DPP party list. And obviously, just like with the Kuomintang, you got to push someone aside, and often you're pushing aside people who've actually worked for the party. You say, wait, I've been busting my butt for the party, and now you're bringing in somebody who was actually an hour ago running for a different party.
So, Jieting, what do you think about that point, the DPP opting in people from other parties, such as Feingold from the Social Democratic Party, to be on their lawmaker-at-large list?
Yeah, I mean, I generally agree. I think it's, it's a way to co-opt the smaller parties. And I think if we compare 2020 to 2016, right, the mood is somewhat different, right? And this is, I think in the history of Taiwanese politics, we kind of see this, right? So the second term elections tend to be a little bit more focused on going back to the basics, going back to the core message, core values of essentially the two large political camps along Taiwan's political divide, which is on China, right? Which is on Taiwan identity, sure, but basically China policy, right? And so I think it's in 2016 you have this sense of, okay, well, we know the sort of my administration was going away. There's a new administration coming in town. Everybody, there's a lot more variable, but there's, I think, more optimism as to what could be done, right? So there's a lot of, people are voting for the smaller parties. People are hopeful and optimistic for, sort of new, fresh air, so to speak. This time around, I think on both sides, really, there's a sense of, okay, we need to stand our ground. This is a defensive battle. We're fighting a defensive stance, right? And so I think there is a little bit of this sense of, okay, we need to shore up our own defenses. And in this case, I hear just through social media chatter that there's, people are talking more about putting the party votes on the DPP and not splitting the non-KMT votes among all the different smaller parties, even though, they may be friendly allies to the DPP. But I think right now, there's much more of a sense of urgency. Okay, we need to keep the DPP's legislative majority, so, don't waste your vote on smaller parties that may not even make it to the legislature. Put all of your eggs into the DPP. And I think it's the same thing going on the KMT side as well. And that's why you see this much backlash against the party list, right? Because other than the KMT, I think there's not much of an alternative right now, right? And so that's, I think that's sort of the mood that we're operating in right now. Taking in Feingold and taking in, all these other traditional allies, so to speak, but then, kind of putting them under the DPP party list really signals this, okay, we need to shore up our defenses. Everybody needs to, come back to the main headquarters. Everybody needs to come back to the camp, basically. And so I think this is the mood that we're operating in right now.
Right, and we'll leave it there on shoring up defences this week here on Taiwan This Week. And I've been joined in the studio today by Ross Feingold.
Have a great weekend.
And on the telephone by Jieting Ye.
Have a great weekend.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's edition of Taiwan This Week here on ICRT with me, Gavin Phipps. And don't forget to check out Taiwan This Week podcasts on iTunes and Android podcast apps where you can get access to all our previous shows.
Tune in again next Friday evening at 9 for another informative look at the top stories of the week with Taiwan This Week. And don't forget to also check out our podcast on our website, icrt.com.tw. Now keep it here for more music and news only on ICRT FM 100.